Very good. It's we're in the 3 weeks now. We know that the Rabbi encourages us in the 3 weeks to learn about the Beis Hamikdash, and especially to learn about the halachas. Pasuk says, "Tzion b'mishpat tipada v'shaveh b'tzedakah." Tzion will be redeemed through mishpat. Mishpat means halacha, and specifically the halachas of the Beis Hamikdash. V'shaveh and its returnees or its captives b'tzedakah through giving tzedakah. So we increase in Torah study, we increase in giving tzedakah during these weeks, and enthusiastically and energetically preparing for the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, when these days will be transformed to days of joy and jubilation. So I'll start with the halacha in Hilchos Beis Abchira of the Rambam, which is connected, or at least the explanation of the halacha is connected somewhat with this week's Seder. In Hilchos Beis Abchira of the Rambam talks about the materials for which the Beis Hamikdash is built. We know that there's an essential difference between the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash. The Mishkan was built of wood, plated in gold. The Beis Hamikdash was built of stone. Not only was it not built of wood, but there's actually a pasuk like Sita Lecha Ashera Kol Eitz al Mizbach Hashem Elokecha, and Chazal darshan from this pasuk Kol Eitz al Mizbach Hashem Elokecha, that no wood should be near the Mizbeach of Hashem. So in the Beis Hamikdash, everything was made only of stone or brick or cement. Nothing was made of wood. And the Rambam teaches this halach in the first perek of Hilchos Beis Abchira, that ein bainin by eitz bailet klal. There's no protruding wood whatsoever. Either you use stone or you use bricks and cement. No wood. The Ravid, who looks for every opportunity to challenge the Rambam, immediately says that it doesn't fit with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that one of the chambers in the Azara was called Lishkas Ha'etz, the chamber of wood. That was the Lishka of the Kohen Gadol. That was the chamber of the Kohen Gadol. So if it's called the chamber of wood, obviously it was made of wood. So how could the Rambam say that there's no wood used in the Beis Hamikdash at all when there's the Lishkas Kohen Gadol was Lishkas Ha'etz? And the Mefarshim struggled to try and answer this question. This is what appears to be a blatant contradiction. And basically what the Kesef Mishnah gives a number of answers. One of the answers he gives is that who says that the Lishkas Ha'etz was made of wood? Maybe the Lishkas Ha'etz was made of stone, like all the other chambers. It's only called Lishkas Ha'etz because they stored wood there. Maybe they stored wood in that Lishka, not because it was made of wood. And the Mefarshim struggle with this because simple meaning of Lishkas Ha'etz is a chamber of wood, a chamber made of wood. So it seems to be a bit of a problem. So the Rebbe suggests that maybe the Rambam's answer, maybe the answer that would work for the Rambam can be found in the Rambam's words. The Rambam says that ain't bailim by eitz bailet. You don't have any wood that is protruding, that is on the surface. But you could build something out of wood and cover it with a layer of cement, and the wood isn't on the surface. The wood isn't visible. That would be fine. And perhaps the makar of the source where the Rambam gets this from is a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara quotes from Shlomo HaMelech. It says, built in the Beis Hamikdash, he built 3 rows of hewn stone, and then a row of cedar wood. There's a special decoration that he made in the Beis Hamikdash, 3 rows of hewn stone, and then a row of cedar. So the question the Gemara asks is, you can't build wood in the Beis Hamikdash. What's he doing with a row of cedar? The Gemara says that it was pushed a little back, and it was covered with a layer of cement. So we see that the prohibition of wood is only on the surface, where it's visible. It was covered with cement. So it wasn't, if it's not visible because it's covered by another layer, then it's not a problem. So perhaps this is the meaning of Lishkas Ha'etz. It was made out of wood, but it was covered with a layer of stone or a layer of cement, and therefore it doesn't in any way contravene the prohibition of building eitz beilim, visible wood in the Beis Hamikdash, but behind the surface, you can build with wood. Perhaps that's the meaning of Lishkas Ha'etz. It was a chamber that was made out of wood, but the wood wasn't visible on the surface of the Azara because it was covered with a layer of cement or whatever else it was covered. Sorry, did you want to ask something? We started off with a halacha that you're not allowed to build wood in the Azara of the Beis Hamikdash. Only stone or brick or cement. And the question is, how does this work with the Kohen Gadol's chamber was called Lishkas Ha'etz, which at first glance seems to be made of wood. Yeah. So we're suggesting that it was made of wood, but it was covered with a layer of cement or stone or whatever, and therefore it wasn't a problem. So sorry?
Is it in Eretz, was this in the desert?
No, we're talking now in Jerusalem, the Beis Hamikdash in Jerusalem. Yeah. In the desert, everything was made of wood. Yeah. I started off with the difference in the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash.
This is the whole Beis Hamikdash.
The Azara, it says. The Azara. The question is what the Azara means, is the Azara also included as the Yisrael and the Russian. There's another question that they built for Sukkot, for the Simchas Beis Sheva, they built a balcony. And they built a bima shel eitz. The question was that full built in, not built in. This is the whole discussion. Anyway, the question, however, is that explains why it was permissible to build wood, because you covered it with a layer of cement, so it's okay. However, it doesn't explain why would they build it out of wood. If all the rest of the chambers of the Beis Hamikdash were built out of stone, why could this one be built of stone as well? What do they need wood there for? So the Rebbe's father, the Nartane, is coming up in less than a month, 20th of Av. And we know that the Rebbe's father wrote when he was in exile. He was the Rav in Yekaterinoslav, which later became Dnepropetrovsk, which later became Dnipro, one of the largest Jewish cities in Ukraine today. So it was then also a large Jewish population, probably much larger than it is today. Yekaterinoslav, he was the Rav there. And the communists weren't very, they weren't very excited about him because he didn't actually cooperate with their agenda. And eventually he was arrested. And he was taken from one prison to another prison. So eventually he was exiled to a very remote place in Kazakhstan, near Kazakhstan, in a completely uncivilized place where there wasn't any amenities. It was a real miserable existence over there. And the Rebbe's mother voluntarily left her home in the Dnepropetrovsk and joined her husband in exile in this place called Chile, real remote place. And she describes in her diary what they went through over there. It wasn't so simple. One of the big problems was that the Rebbe's father was a Goin Adir and a Makubal. And he had tremendous Chidusha Torah. He's coming up with Chidusha Torah the whole time. But in his exile, he was a genius in Torah, in both the revealed and the esoteric Torah. And he didn't have any paper with which to write his Chidushim. He didn't have any ink. He didn't have any svarim. So the Rebbe's mother managed to bring with her a few svarim. She brought a Zohar, Tanya, and a few volumes of Gemara. And she went out into the fields and she picked berries and she cooked the berries into some kind of a primitive ink from which he was able to write Chidushim on the margins of his Svarim. Didn't have any paper, but on the margins of his Svarim, and they're different colors because they were made with the berries, so you could see different color ink in the Svarim. Anyway, eventually these Svarim were smuggled into the American embassy in Moscow after he passed away, and they eventually made it to America, and these Chidushim that he wrote in the margins of his Svarim were published. So on the margins of his Masechta Midas, where it talks about Lishkas Ha'etz, it talks about this chamber of wood, he writes, why was the Kohen Gadol's chamber called? Why was it wood? What does the Kohen Gadol have to do with wood? So he explains that the Kohen Gadol represents Arichos Yamin, longevity. Because we find, Pasuk says, Eirech Yamin B'Yamina, that longevity is to the right. The right is Chesed. Right? Chesed is to the right, Gvur is to the left. And the Kohen Gadol We know that Aaron HaKohen is Oyev Shalom, the Reid of Shalom, Oyev is Abrius, and Mekabel L'Torah. That's Aaron HaKohen showed tremendous love to everyone. That's Chesed. And we know that the Kohanim, when they duchen, they make a bracha, Shekhi D'Shalom, B'Deshasei Shel Aaron, the Tzivanu L'Varich is Am Yisrael, Ba'ahava. The Kohanim the Kohen Gadol is Chesed. Yamin. And Oyrech Yamin B'Yimina. Longevity is the right. So the Kohen Gadol was himself Ma'irech Yamin, and he was also the source of Arichas Yamim for Yidden in general. And this we find actually in this week's Sedra. Because in this week's Sedra it speaks about the Reitzeach B'Shegig. It talks about a person who committed a murder unintentionally, that he has to run away to the cities of refuge. And how long does he stay there? So in this week's Sedra it says, Yashav Sham Ad Mois HaKohen HaGadol. He has to stay there until the Kohen Gadol dies. What's the connection? Why does he stay there until the Kohen Gadol dies? So Rashi brings from Chazal that the Kohen Gadol was Marich Yamav Shalom. Kohen Gadol brought longevity to Yidden. This person, as a murderer, he cut short someone's life. So it's not right that the one who cuts short life should go out before the one who brought longevity to people. So we see that the Kohen Gadol, his inyan is Arichas Yam. He's called the Marich Yamav Shalom. So being that wood represents longevity, we find the pasuk in Yeshaya, Yemei ha'etz Yemei Ami. The days of a tree are the days of my nation. So we know the trees last a very long time. We know the redwood trees that are more than 1,000 years old. So trees represent longevity, and that's why the chamber of the Kohen Gadol, who was Ma'irich Yamin and brought other Yidden Arichas Yamin, was made of wood, representing the inyan of Arichas Yamin. That's what he writes on the margin of his. He writes further that this was only the case until the passing of Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik was one of the first Kohanim Gedolim in the second Beis Hamikdash, and he was a great tzaddik. So during the first Beis Hamikdash and during the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash, until the passing of Shimon HaTzadik, it was called Lishkas Ha'etz. However, after Shimon HaTzadik, when the situation deteriorated and the office of Kohen Gadol was then sold to the highest bidder, a lot of corruption going on, and the people that bought their way into the office of Kohen Gadol were not worthy. And because they weren't worthy, they didn't live very long. Because when you go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Kohen Gadol would go Yom Kippur into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And if the Kohen Gadol entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim and he wasn't worthy of entering to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so either he didn't come out alive, and they had to pull him out with a rope, or he didn't survive the year. So it often happened that every year they needed to appoint a new Kohen Gadol. In certain times, there were certain times that the Kohen Gadol survived, but there were certain times year after year, they appointed a new Kohen Gadol. And therefore, the chamber of the Kohen Gadol was now called Lishkas Parhedrin. Instead of Lishkas Ha'etz, it was renamed Lishkas Parhedrin. What does Parhedrin mean? The Matos says in Yuma, Parhedrin means government-appointed officials.
I'm so sorry. Don't repeat everything. But I missed the connection. I think I misunderstood you. If someone is in the city of refuge.
If someone is killed unintentionally, and if someone killed by mistake, unintentionally, and he has to run away to the cities of refuge, the Arei Mikvah, for how long does he have to stay in the Arei Mikvah? So the pasuk says in this week's Sedra, until the Kohen Gadol passes away. Until the Kohen Gadol passes away. So that could be a very long time. It could be a very short time. Till the Kohen Gadol passes away. What's the connection? Exactly. Rashi has the same question. Also wants to know what's the connection. And he explains, quotes from the Chachamim, that the Kohen Gadol is Marich Yamav Shalom. The Kohen Gadol brings longevity to people. The Kohen Gadol, through his service in the Beis Hamikdash, brings longevity, long life to you. This person who murdered shortened someone's life. So it's not appropriate that the one who shortens someone's life should go out before the one who brings longevity to people. So only after the Kohen Gadol passes away, that's when he can leave the city of refuge. So we see from there that not only does the Kohen Gadol live long, but the Kohen Gadol brings longevity to Klal Yisrael. So his thing is longevity, and that's why his chamber is called the chamber of wood, and it's made of wood because he's connected with wood, which represents longevity. Okay? And he explains this Kabbalistically, and in a reasonable perspective. And he says, but that was only the case in the early days of the second Beis Hamikdash. But later, when the office of Kohen Gadol descended as a result of the corruption, where it was sold to the highest bid, so many of the Kohenim Gedolim who officiated in the second Beis Hamikdash were not deserving of being a Kohen Gadol; they weren't worthy, so they didn't last through the year. As we know that someone who goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and not worthy of going to the Kodesh HaKadoshim doesn't survive. So many times the Kohen Gadol had to be replaced year after year. So the chamber of the Kohen Gadol in the Beis Hamikdash was renamed the Lishkas Parhedrin. What does Parhedrin mean? Parhedrin, the Gemara says, means government appointed officials. Like when the government appoints officials, there are officials that are reappointed every year. Every year they put in a new official. I can tell you from my own experience from being the MC at the Giant Beneder in Golders Green Station. One of the things I have to do is introduce the mayor of Barnet. So I know that the mayor of Barnet every year is a new mayor. Yeah, you never have the same mayor twice in a row. Every year is a new mayor. Yeah. So it's government appointed officials that are exchanged every year. So the Lishka of the Kohen Gadol was now called Lishkas Parhedrin, suggesting that the Kohen Gadol was often replaced every year.
So when did the cities of refuge disappear? When did they lose?
It seems they were there the whole time of the second Beis Hamikdash.
So in other words, somebody prepared for this. This was not so bad. I'll be out next week.
And you couldn't kill intentionally, unintentionally. It was only if you killed unintentionally.
But they can still think never mind, I'll be out next week.
But they got a very good chance.
Yeah, same point, yeah. Anyway, so the question is, isn't it a bit strange that a room in the Beis Hamikdash would be named with a derogatory name? The name Lishkas HaEitz, which represents longevity, I understand why you would name a room in the Beis Hamikdash with such a name. But why would we name it Parhedrin, which has such a derogatory meaning, bringing out something negative about the Jewish people, that the Kohenim Gedolim were unworthy and they kept not surviving? Yeah. Plus, there was also some of the time in the second Beis Hamikdash there were worthy Kohenim Gedolim, like Yochanan Kohen Gadol, that went in 80 years into the Kodesh HaKadosh. So obviously he must have been a tzaddik if he went in 80 years into the Kodesh HaKadosh. And there was Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol who went in 10 years, and there was Ben Charson who went in 11 years. So there were Kohenim Gedolim tzaddikim as well, and at their time it was also called Lishkas Parhed. So there must be something positive about the name Parhedrin that explains why it was okay to name a chamber in the Beis Hamikdash with this name. The name that the explanation that the Gemara gives, because that they replaced the Kohenim Gedolim regularly, doesn't seem to be a very positive thing, especially considering that this chamber was used primarily in preparation for Yom Kippur. The Kohen Gadol would prepare for 7 days to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Mishnah says that 7 days before Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol would leave his home and go and dwell in the Beis Hamikdash in this Lishkas Parhedrin, and over there he prepared himself for 7 days to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. These 7 days were Aseret Yimei Tshuva. Now, Aseret Yimei Tshuva, we're very careful about the words we use. But to use a derogatory name, and especially in such a time, in such a place, in the Beis Hamikdash, in the holy time, it's very puzzling. Why would they name the room with a derogatory name? So it makes sense that there must be some positive dimension to this concept. What is the positive dimension to this? So the Rebbe explains it on 2 levels. A more superficial level and a deeper level. We'll start off with the more superficial level. It's also a beautiful concept. It says like this: these Kohenim Gedolim who purchased the office of Kohen Gedolim, which was offered to the highest bidder during times of corruption, and they paid a fortune of money to be able to have that privilege of becoming the Kohen Gadol. Didn't they see what happened to the last Kohen Gadol, who wasn't worthy of going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim? So they were paying a fortune of money to become Kohen Gadol, even though they knew that there was a good chance that it would cost them their life as well. Why did they pay so much money to become Kohen Gadol and to risk their lives? So the answer is that what happened when the Kohen Gadol went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Kohen Gadol, one of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he got face-to-face experience with the Shekhinah. He had a revelation of the greatest revelation of godliness in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Right? Remember, we learned in Tanya that by Matan Torah, you had the absolute revelation of Hashem. Ata hareisa ladas, Hashem l'elakim elodim l'vadei. Yidden, it was so overwhelming that Parcha Nishmasam, their souls expired. It was such an overwhelming revelation, and they had to be resurrected. And then Hashem said to the Jewish people, I want to be with you, but I see that you can't cope with it. So the solution is, we asuli migdash, v'shachanti b'soicham, make a migdash. I will dwell in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That will be closed up with a curtain, and you won't be overwhelmed, and I'll be able to dwell with you. So it comes out that when the Kohen Gadol went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he was face to face with this incredible revelation, which was somewhat similar to the revelation at Sinai. So to have that experience of such a great revelation of godliness, even one time, even the unworthy amongst the Jewish people were ready to pay a fortune of money and to put their life on the line just to have that connection with Hashem one time, to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and to be able to experience that. So that's a tremendous compliment to these Kohanim Gedolim who risked everything to be able to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim one time. Let me just complete the thought, and then I'll take the question. So that also explains why Dafke, this room in which the Kohen Gadol sat for 7 days preparing to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, was called Lishkas Parhedrin, because it was to bring to his attention how special it is to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That so many people paid money and risked their life just to be able to go one Yom Kippur into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, because it's such an incredible privilege to have that revelation. And knowing this, the Kohen Gadol would do his utmost to prepare properly for this incredible experience. So even those Kohanim Gedolim who were tzaddikim and lasted for many years, it was for them also a source of inspiration to be in the Lishkas Parhedrin and to be reminded of what an incredible privilege it is to go into the Kodesh HaKadosh. That's one explanation. What's the question?
The men who bought the right to go in, were they Kohanim?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it had to be a Kohen. No, that wasn't.
It didn't have to be.
The question is who the Kohen Gadol. Only the Kohen Gadol went into the Kohen, the high priest.
Yes, so in other words, it was a financial competition
amongst the Kohen. Yeah. Now, that's one interpretation. A deeper interpretation. What did the Kohen Gadol do in the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Kohen Gadol went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim as the representative of Klal Yisrael and Yom Kippur. Right? The Avodah of Yom Kippur is Tshuva. So the Kohen Gadol went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim as the representative of Klal Yisrael, leading Klal Yisrael in the Avodah of Tshuva. Now, by Tshuva, the Rambam says in Hilchos Tshuva, one of the reasons why Tshuva wipes away your entire past is because when a person does Tshuva, he becomes transformed into a new entity. Becomes a new person. And he can say honestly, Eineni oisei ha'isha asa oisem ha'maasei. I'm no longer the person that did those things. That's not me anymore. I'm a new me. Tshuva is an act of self-transformation. So the person that has on his record these misdeeds no longer exists. It's a new person now. And that's why Tshuva has the power to atone for past misdeeds. So it follows that the concept of Tshuva is a self-transformation to the point where the previous existence is no longer there, a new existence now. So in a sense, that is the opposite of Arichas Yamim. Arichas Yamim means that the previous existence continues to exist for a very long time. Tshuva is that the previous existence no longer exists. And there's a new existence now. I'm a new person. So in the Kohen Gadol's role as the representative of Klal Yisrael and Yom Kippur to lead Klal Yisrael in the Avodah of Tshuva, in this sense, his task and what he represented was not Arichas Yamim, but the opposite of Arichas Yamim. So the Kohen Gadol had two functions simultaneously. On one hand is Eirech Yamim B'Mina. Kohen Gadol represents the right. He's a tzaddik, and he's ma'arich yamim, and he brings arichas yamim to Klal Yisrael. But at the same time, the Kohen Gadol also has another function as the one who represents Klal Yisrael and Yom Kippur in the Aved of Tshuva, which Tshuva is the opposite. And for this, the chamber was called Lishkas Parhedrin, which means a new appointed Kohen Gadol every year. Which means even if the same Kohen Gadol continued for 80 years consecutively, but he was a new Kohen Gadol each year. Because when he went into the Kodesh HaKodashim, he experienced such a self-transformation that he became a new person.
Did the Kohen Gadol go in every day?
No, only on Yom Kippur.
Oh, yeah.
Only on Yom Kippur.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Only on Yom Kippur. In the Kodesh HaKodashim, he could go into Beis HaMikdash, but the Holy of Holies could only go in on Yom Kippur. And he went in on Yom Kippur on behalf of the entire Klal Yisrael. Since Yom Kippur is a day of Tshuva, the ultimate day of Tshuva, so he led Klal Yisrael in the Avodah of Tshuva. Tshuva is about self-transformation. So in a sense, the Kohen Gadol comes out a new person. So he's not the same Kohen Gadol that went in last year.
He didn't go Rosh Hashanah?
No, only Yom Kippur. He went into the Beis HaMikdash. There were avodas to be done in the Beis HaMikdash. But in the Holy of Holies, in the Kodesh HaKodashim, once a year.
And in the Beis HaMikdash he went?
Yeah, Beis HaMikdash he went every day.
And what did he do?
If whenever he wanted to offer a carbon, he could offer a carbon. Whenever he wanted, whatever avodah the Kohen Gadol chose to do, he could do. But on Yom Kippur, he had to do everything. And we read in our davening Yom Kippur about all the avodah of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur in the Beis HaMikdash. It's a major event. So the
And did the other Kohanim go in as well?
in the Kodesh HaKodashim, no, only the Kohen Gadol could go into the Kodesh. So unless something had to be fixed, but generally as an avodah, only the Kohen Gadol was allowed into the Kodesh HaKodashim. So to make a long story short, so the idea of Parhedrin is newly appointed official, a newly appointed Kohen Gadol. Because even if it's the same Kohen Gadol year after year after year, he's a new Kohen Gadol. And that explains an interesting halacha. We just actually learned the Rambam a few days ago. That is that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, he goes into the Kodesh HaKodashim, he goes in with white garments, with white linen garments, big day love, right? Normally the Kohen Gadol wore very decorative garments with the chayshen and the ephod and the me'il and the tzeines, the whole, yeah. But in the Kodesh HaKodashim, he went in with simple linen, 4 white garments. So the Torah says that when he comes out of the Kodesh HaKodashim, when he finishes the Avodah of Yom Kippur, he comes out of the Kodesh HaKodashim, upasat is big day habad ashalav ashbavayah Kodesh. He has to remove the garments of linen that he wore when he entered into the Kodesh HaKodashim, v'hinicham sham, and leave them there. In the place where he removes the garments, he leaves them. And our Chachamim learn from this pasuk v'hinicham sham that they are concealed, they are buried in the place where he removes them, and he cannot use them again. It can never be used again. The question is, it's a new set of garments. He wore them today for the first time. What a shame. What about tashchis? To destroy them. And we'd assume that for the Kohen Gadol, they made solid garments. So they could probably last for a few years. Why should they have to be disposed of? Based on this, it's very understood. Because since he's a new Kohen Gadol every year, so the garments that he wore last year fitted him last year. But the new Kohen Gadol needs a new set of garments. So because the Kohen Gadol represents, the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol represents self-transformation, the point that he becomes a totally new person, the new person needs a new set of garments. So bearing this in mind, we understand that there's 2 aspects to the Kohen Gadol. There's the aspect of Lishkas Ha'etz, that represents the Kohen Gadol as a tzaddik, whose Avodah is Arichas Yamim, Ma'arich Yamav Shel Adam. For that he has a chamber of wood. But the same Kohen Gadol also had another function, and that was to lead Klal Yisrael in Tshuva. And the Avodah of Tshuva is on the left. That comes from din, from challenging himself and from demanding of himself a total transformation. And that is the concept of Parhedrin. So therefore, the chamber of the Kohen Gadol had 2 names. It had the name Lishkas Ha'etz, representing the Arichas Yamim aspect of the Kohen Gadol, and it had the name Lishkas Parhedrin, representing the Tshuva aspect of the Kohen Gadol. And that explains why, even though the chamber was made of wood, it had to be covered with a layer of cement concealing the wood. because the Kohen Gadol also had to be involved in the other direction, in the Avodah of Tshuva, which is the opposite of Arichas Yom. So even though the chamber was made of wood, but it was covered in a way that the wood was not visible on the surface, because you have to make room for the other aspect of the Kohen Gadol's Avodah. And this explains why during the first Beis Hamikdash and the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash, as long as Shimon HaTzadik was alive, the primary name of this room was Lishkas Ha'etz. Because by those Kohen Gadol who were tzaddikim, the main Avodah was the Avodah of Arichas Yom, Avodah of a tzaddik. With the tzaddik goes from strength to strength, but it's all within the same, comparably speaking, within one level, going stronger and stronger, higher and higher, but within one level. Then when you had Kohanim Gedolim after Shimon HaTzadik who were not so worthy, there the main focus was on Avodah Tshuva. And the Avodah Tshuva in such a manner that it became a new person. Therefore, now the room was primarily referred to as Lishkas Parhedrin. And this explains also why in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi mentions both. In the Maseches Midas, he calls it Lishkas Ha'etz. And in Maseches Yuma, he calls it Lishkas Parhedrin. The Kohen Gadol would leave his house for 7 days, preparation for Yom Kippur, and he would be taken to the Beis Hamikdash to Lishkas Parhedrin. So when he's talking about Maseches Midas, Midas means measurements, limitations. The Avodah of a tzaddik is within measure. Tzaddik is perfect and it goes higher and higher, but it's all within a measured level. The Avodah of Al Tshuva is completely beyond all measurement. As we said, he becomes a totally transformed individual. It goes out of his level completely, goes into a whole different existence. So therefore, in Maseches Midas, he refers to it as Lishkas Ha'etz. And in Maseches Yuma, which is the Masechta about Yom Kippur, the Masechta about Tshuva, there he refers to it as Lishkas Parhedrin. Both aspects are the same thing.
Who appoints the Kohen?
So it's the authorities that run the Beis Hamikdash. But the question is, in whose hands is it? So during the first Beis Hamikdash, in the early years of the second Beis Hamikdash, it was in the right hands. And then, unfortunately, there was a deterioration and it fell into the wrong hands. So there was corruption.
During the first Beis Hamikdash, the higher, the level of cleansing was higher.
The level of what?
The level of cleansing was higher. They didn't need
right.
the Shiur.
Or they had, it was tshuva on a level which is tzadikim's tshuva. So it wasn't such an emphasis on the parhedrin side of things. Anyway, that is something to take away on the Beis Hamikdash department. Now we're going to go back to Tanya. Sure. His son Elazar.
So in theory, it went through straight down to Aaron's family. So Eli was related to Aaron.
All the Kohanim Gedolim were descendants of Aaron.
Until we got down to Eli, his sons. And
so whoever took over after that was also a descendant of Aaron. Might have been from another lineage of it. It's all descendants of Aaron.
So a new Kohen Gadol was chosen from the Kohanim.
From the Kohanim. Okay, so we are in the middle of chapter 7. I think it's 22 on top of the page. Yeah, I think we'll start from right after the brackets, where it says, that's 7 lines from the top of the page. The brackets conclude the words Kamesh Kosav La'il, and we'll start from the words V'hi B'china M'mutzas. So we were learning about Klipas Noiga. We said there's Kedusha and Klipa, there's holiness and there's unholiness. And in the unholiness itself, we have 2 levels. Shalosh Klipas Hatmeis L'gamri, the 3 Klipas that are totally impure. And then we have Klipas Noiga, the transparent Klipa, which is A lighter klippa, it is nothing forbidden over there. It's only that it's lacking subservience to the oneness of Hashem. And he says, "V'hi b'china memutzas." This level of klippas neiga is an intermediary level, which is an intermediate between shalosh klippas atmeis lagamri, between the three klippas that are totally impure, between b'chinas amadregas hakdusha, between the level of kedusha. So, as I explained last week, that you have things that are forbidden, either objects that are forbidden, or actions that are forbidden, or speech that is forbidden, or thoughts that are forbidden. They are clearly defiant of Hashem's authority. Right? Hashem says you're not allowed to do this. This act is clearly defying the authority of Hashem. But then there are permissible things, permissible objects, permissible actions, permissible words, permissible thoughts. But the question is, are they for the sake of the service of Hashem? If a person is just engaging in ordinary behavior, because that's what he would like to do, that's what he enjoys. He's not thinking about Hashem, he's thinking about himself. I enjoy doing this kind of thing. I enjoy speaking about this conversation, or I enjoy thinking about such thoughts. But it's got nothing to do with my service of Hashem. So it doesn't defy Hashem's authority, but it defies the concept of Ein Oid Milvade, that there's nothing else except Hashem. It defies the idea of Ani Loy Nivreisi El L'Shamash Eskeni. I was not created for any other purpose other than to serve Hashem. Because you're totally forgetting that, and you're moving into an area which is devoid of Hashem's existence. You're doing your own thing. In a subtle form, you could say that you're serving a form of idol worship. The idol worship is me. I'm doing what I want to do. I'm eating because I enjoy the food. I'm sleeping because I like to sleep. I'm not thinking now about Hashem. I'm not thinking about how I'm going to fulfill my purpose of existence in the service of Hashem. I'm thinking about myself. So that is not totally impure. It's not the shalosh klippas atmeis legamri. It's just klippas noiga. It's the transparent klippa, which is the intermediary between the totally forbidden, three klippas that are totally impure, and kedusha. And because it's an intermediary between the three totally impure klippas and kedusha, therefore he continues and he says, "Upa'amim pa'amim shenichleles v'shalosh klippas atmeis." That's why sometimes this intermediary level of klippas noiga can sometimes be absorbed into the three totally impure klippas. Soon to explain how. It could be absorbed into the totally impure klippas. If you take a forbidden object and you use it if you take a permissible object, and you use it for a forbidden purpose.
Is it aspect you're just relaxing in order to have more koyach to serve Hashem?
Oh, so that's a different story. If you're relaxing in order to have more koyach to serve Hashem, then the relaxing itself becomes indirectly part of the mitzvah. That's kol masecha l'shem shamayim u'b'chol drachecha da'eyu. All your deeds should be for the sake of heaven, and in all your ways you should know Him. So that becomes an accessory to kedusha, as we'll soon see, and then becomes elevated into kedusha. But if it's for reasons that are completely devoid of your relationship with Hashem, then it remains, it's klippa. But if it's not forbidden, then it's not shalosh klippas atmeis. Yeah. So this klippas noiga it's elastic. You can take it anywhere you want to go. It can become sometimes dragged down into shalosh klippas atmeis legamri. As the Eitz Chaim from the Arizal 4-49, beginning of chapter 4, quotes from the Zohar, that there's a possibility of dragging down klippas noiga into shalosh klippas atmeis. And sometimes it's absorbed and it rises into the level of holiness. The hainu, which is when the good which is mixed into klippas noiga becomes picked out from the evil, the geiver, and it becomes dominant. The oila v'nichlo v'kedusha, and it rises and becomes absorbed in holiness. So when the intention in what you're doing is the intention in order to serve Hashem, then you're taking the sparks of holiness that are contained in the klippas noiga, and you're making them dominant, and you're elevating the klippas noiga and making it absorbed in kedusha. For example, let's say a person eats a very tasty steak, and drinks wine that is spiced up. But the reason why he's eating the steak and the reason why he's drinking the wine is not because he happens to like steak or he happens to like this wine, but rather it's in order to broaden his mind, to be in a better position to be able to serve Hashem and study his Torah. In other words, he's dealing with some very, very challenging concepts in Torah, and he needs an open mind to be able to really understand them properly. And the way that what makes his mind function best is when he has a good steak, then his mind is functioning well. So if his purpose in eating the steak is in order that he should be able to serve Hashem properly, then it becomes a means to serve Hashem. So he's taking klipas noiga, and he's taking the sparks of kedusha which are contained within it and giving them dominance, and therefore he's elevating the klipas noiga into kedusha. And he's after taking a case like that. He could have said he could have said that he eats hard bread and drinks a cup of water in order to have the energy to serve Hashem. Like the Mishnah says, Pas b'melech teichel ma'im b'suratishta. But then he's only elevating the nutrients in the food. What about the flavor in the food? What about the taste in the food? They're also klipas noiga. There has to be a way of elevating them as well. So there could be a situation, we're talking about, we have to be honest over here. The person is using it as an excuse, then he's fooling himself. Now we're talking about a person who honestly, the reason why he's eating the steak and the reason why he's drinking the wine is to put himself into the right frame of mind that's going to help him serve Hashem better.
But he could be fooling himself.
If he's fooling himself, then it's an achmanis on him. Or we're talking in a case where he's not fooling himself. In principle, it could be a situation. I give a mashal like this to explain it. I know in camp there's color war, and every team has to provide songs and plays and everything, right? So it comes 3 a.m, and this team hasn't put together their theme song yet. And there's one individual who we know is very talented, and they're putting pressure on him. Come on, sit down and write a song. So he says, okay, you know what? Get me a Coke, and get me this and this, and I'll sit down and I'll work on it. So he's not really interested in the Coke. He's interested in the song. That's going to help him inspire Yiddish children to love the Eibush. But in order to open up his mind, that he should be able to come up with the right lyrics, and the right words, and the right spirit, that he has to invest in that song, he needs to be in a certain frame of mind. So he's using objects of klipas noiga. If he would eat or drink something forbidden, that would never be accepted. But permissible things can be used as a tool to serve Hashem. Right? So if a person eats bisra shmeina d'tura, fat meat of an ox, or shaisa yayin mevusam, and he drinks spiced wine, but the purpose of it is the harchiv daitei l'Hashem u'teirasei, to broaden his mind for Hashem and his Torah. Kidama Rabbi, as Rabbi said, Rabbi said that wine and a good aroma open up his mind to have a better understanding of Torah. Another example would be it's Shabbos or it's Yom Tov, and there's a mitzvah in the Torah to delight in Hashem's delight of Shabbos and to rejoice in Hashem's joy of Yom Tov. And he goes and he eats tasty food and drinks tasty drinks in order to honor Shabbos and Yom Tov. So he's eating. If he tried to do that with forbidden food, it wouldn't be acceptable in any circumstances. Just because it's Shabbos and Yom Tov doesn't allow you to eat forbidden food. But permissible food, which a whole week you wouldn't eat, because what do you need it for? Comes Shabbos and Yom Tov, you need it in order to honor Shabbos and Yom Tov. So you're doing it in order to serve Hashem. Then the energy, the life energy of this meat or this wine, which was getting its energy from klipas lega, which is the neutral level, the oila Hashem, and it rises to Hashem, like a burnt offering or like a regular offering. And it says that these two expressions, ka'oila, ka'karbon, represent the two examples that we gave. We gave 2 examples. One example we gave is that a person is eating in order to put himself in a better frame of mind. So there, the food itself doesn't become a mitzvah, but it's in order to do a mitzvah. And in the case of Shabbos and Yom Tov, the food itself becomes a mitzvah. So one is ke'oila or ke'karbon. In an oila, carbon oila, in a burnt offering, the entire carbon goes up in smoke, goes up in the fire of the mizbeach. So that's like the case where the entire, where Shabbos and Yom Tov, the etzem eating is a mitzvah. But then there is the case where a person ate in order to put himself into the proper frame of mind. That's like the regular carbon, where only part of it goes up in the fire of the Mizbeach, and the other part is eaten by the Kohanim or by the owners, depending on the carbon, and it's also holy. But it's a different level of holiness. Yes?
On the Shabbos, it's like, especially the holiest does it, or because he's going to secret on the Shabbos. So,
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. What were the two options?
the food starts in a completely condition.
If the food is eaten in order to honor Shabbos and to honor Yom Tov, then that itself is a mitzvah, because the karasol Shabbos einek, to draw down into Shabbos delight, or samachta b'chagecha, to rejoice on Yom Tov, is a mitzvah. So if he's eating the food and drinking the wine in order to be makayim the mitzvah of einek Shabbos and Yom Tov, then that itself becomes a mitzvah.
Yeah, because of the mitzvah of the honor.
Yeah, right.
But if he wants just during the week, it's...
Not only that, even if he ate it on Shabbos, but his intention was not l'kavet Shabbos, his intention was because he's enjoying it. And in fact, he's using Shabbos as an excuse to be distracted from Hashem and be focused on his own desires. We're talking about a person who's honest with himself, and he's eating l'kavet Shabbos. He's eating l'kavet Yom Tov, right? So then it rises to Hashem like an offering, like an offering that's brought to the Beis Hamikdash. It's also a physical animal, but it's brought as a carbon to the Beis Hamikdash, so it becomes holy. So in Klipas Neiga, there are sparks of Kedusha, and when you use it for the right purpose, the sparks of Kedusha become the dominant force within that object, and that elevates it all to Kedusha. That is when we use the example of food. Now he's going to give another example, and that is by speech. We know that there's three types of speech. There's forbidden speech, there's mitzvah speech, and there's neutral speech. Forbidden speech, like Lashon Hara, Nivel Peh, that's forbidden. There is mitzvah speech, like davening, learning, saying words of Abbas Yisrael, and then there is neutral speech. Yeah, speaking stam. So, question is, like he's giving the example of cracking a joke. Yeah. So the question is, what's the purpose of it? If the purpose is that I like to laugh, therefore I'm cracking jokes, I should laugh, and I enjoy laughing, so I'm serving myself again. But if the purpose is that as a result of this joke, it should put me to the right frame of mind that will help me serve Hashem better, then it's for the purpose of Hashem. So he says, similarly, if a person cracks a joke, to open his mind and to reach and to give gladness to his heart for the purpose of Hashem and his Torah and his service would need to be done with joy. Torah should be learned with joy. Avodas Hashem should be done with joy. The person finds himself a little bit not such a joyous state of mind, so he cracks a joke in order to make himself more besimcha, and his mind should be open and his heart should be open to serve Hashem properly, and in order to serve Hashem. The Gemara says that Rabbi, when he taught his Talmidim, he would begin the shiur with a joke. He would first say a joke, chila first, to get the chachamim to laugh, and then when they were in the right frame of mind, he began to teach serious stuff. So he used something neutral as a means to kedusha. So he caused the sparks of kedusha that are giving life to this neutral entity to become the dominant force within it, elevated to kedusha, and it becomes absorbed in kedusha. We said before that something which is klipas neiga, being that klipas neiga is an intermediary between kedusha and klipa. So when you use it for the right purpose, the dominance, the sparks of kedusha within it become dominant, and they elevate it to the right level.
There's certain phrases which have been liberated, and whilst the original concept is harmless, there's a second version which isn't so harmless. How do we make sure that, obviously we don't use either phrase, but we make sure that people are aware? What was the question?
I think that if a person has the right intentions, he'll find his way. However, there's another side to the coin. And that is that you can take permissible things, neutral things, and you can cause the negative forces within them to become dominant. And he says, but if a person is eating meat are drinking wine with a gluttonous intention. L'malis taivas gufei v'nafshei abamis, just to fill the passions of his body and his animal soul. So he's catering to the animalistic side of himself. That's the element of water from the four evil elements of which the Nefesh Habamis is made up. Remember, we learned in the first chapter, the Nefesh Habamis is also, like everything else, made of four elements. Eish, Mayim, Ruach, Afar. Everything physical is made up of four physical elements. And everything spiritual is made up of four spiritual elements. Everything in Kedusha is made of four Kedusha elements. And everything in Klippa is made of four Klippa elements. So the animal soul is made up of four spiritual Klippa elements. From the element of fire comes certain character traits like anger and haughtiness. From the element of water came the desire for passion, for passionate desires. From the element of wind, we said, came lightheadedness and mocking and idle talk and boasting. From the element of earth, we said, came depression and sadness and laziness. So from the element of water of the Nefesh Habamis comes the concept of taiva, of passionate desires for things. So if a person is eating meat or drinking wine with gluttonous intentions, that's the catering to the Yisod HaMayim Arba Yisod Yisroim Sheba, to the spirit of passion in the Nefesh Habamis, which is from the element of water, from the four evil elements within it. Shemimenu midas hataiva, from which comes the attribute of passion. So he's causing the life force within the meat and the wine that he's consuming and causing it to descend. And he's causing it to temporarily descend into the total evil of the three totally impure clips. And temporarily it becomes absorbed in total evil. And his body becomes temporarily a garment and a chariot to the powers of Klippa, because he's facilitating the program and the project of Klippa, which is a distraction from Hashem. Now, why does he say temporarily? If it's bad, it's bad. Why were you saying temporarily? So this he explains. We have to remember that we're dealing here with a permissible thing. The word for permissible in Hebrew is mutter. The word for forbidden in Hebrew is asur. Right? What do the words mutter and asur literally mean? Literally, we say brachas every morning. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam matir asurim. What does that mean? It means that Hashem unties the bound. So asur means bound and tied, and mutter means untied. Why do we call something forbidden tied and something permissible untied? So he explains that something which is forbidden is tied down to the klippas. And since it's tied down to the klippas, even if you're going to use it for the right purpose, it can't be untied from the klippas. It's bound to it. So if you use it for the right purpose, but it's forbidden, it can't be elevated to kedusha because it's stuck in the klippas. But if it's a davar mutter, if it's a permissible thing, which the word mutter means untied, that means even though it's in klippa, but it's untied from the klippas. And therefore, if it's used with the right intention for the right purpose, it could be elevated because it's not tied down to the klippas. So what happens if a person takes a permissible object, like in this case, kosher meat, or kosher wine, and he drinks it or eats it for gluttonous purposes? So his intentions are less than desirable, very undesirable. But the object that he used was a kosher object. So it's a davar mutter. So even if he schlepped it down through his actions into shalosh klippas hatmeyos, through his intentions, he pulled it down into three totally impure klippas. But later, if he uses that energy in the service of Hashem, it could be drawn back up because it was a davar hamutter. It was untied. It wasn't stuck in klippa. So until the person turns around and returns to the service of Hashem and and to his Torah, and he uses that energy to serve Hashem at the study of his Torah. Since we're dealing here with permissible meat, and permissible wine, therefore it's able to go back up with him when he returns to the service of Hashem. So when he goes and serves Hashem with this energy, the food that gave him that energy, even though it's at the moment that he ate it with the wrong intentions, but because it was permissible food, he's able to take it back up with him and return it to the service of Hashem. Shezel lashon heter umuter, and this is the deeper meaning in the words permissible, untied. Klaimar, in other words, she'enei kasher v'asur b'deach tzayim. It's not tied down to the hands of the klippas. So yuchul lachzer l'ales l'Hashem, which would prevent it from returning and going back up to Hashem. So had it have been non-kosher food, and he could stand on his head and spit wooden nickels in this, it wouldn't make a difference. Non-kosher food, you can't elevate to kedusha. However, since it was kosher food, even if it was eaten with the wrong intention, so later, if he uses that energy to serve Hashem, he can pull it back up from klipa into kedusha.
So what you're saying is, even if a person has this steak and wine, just for self-gratification, but afterwards he goes to a shiur
and he uses that energy to serve Hashem, so he's elevating it back to kedusha from shalosh kippus hatmeis. He dragged it down into shalosh kippus hatmeis. Temporarily, he became a vehicle for shalosh kippus hatmeis and a chariot to shalosh kippus hatmeis, a facilitator of something very negative. But it's only temporarily, because if he uses that energy later in the service of Hashem, he can elevate it. Had it been forbidden, he wouldn't be able to elevate it, because it'd be tied down to the klippus. But since it wasn't permissible, it had a good hechsher, so now he can schlep it up and bring it back into kedusha.
But he can't do that all the time.
Well, it depends what his intention, what happens, what does he use it for? He shouldn't be doing it all the time, because you wouldn't want to be a facilitator for klippa, shalosh kippus hatmeis, even temporarily. But if it happens, then he can bring it back up to kedusha because it was permissible. Yeah. We're not talking here about that he.
When he does the shiur,
we're not talking about he did the shiur. We're talking about that he took that energy and elevated it to avodas Hashem. But what happens when he does teshuva, we're going to deal with soon. That depends what kind of teshuva and what. Teshuva, the Parshas you need to do when you do an aveda. He didn't do an aveda.
Okay, right.
yeah, that means there's someone who did ate something.
So that we're going to get to soon. That's the next thing on the agenda. Yes.
Man goes into a kosher restaurant, has a burger,
Mm-hmm.
washes,
Mm-hmm.
eats this top of the range overpriced burger, and benches accordingly. We know he's there for the experience of, well, I've just overpaid this.
How do you know? Maybe he's there because he wants to learn Torah and he's hungry and he can't concentrate, so he's going to eat something to be able to learn Torah.
But what I'm saying is, because he's washed, eaten, benched, but he was there because he wanted the food experience, surely by washing and benching, he's still brought.
He's brought some kedusha into it, but it's not the way it's supposed to be. And the fact that he ate it for gluttonous reasons causes it to descend into shalosh kippus hatmeis, and he has to use it for the right purpose to be able to schlep it. However, some trace of this experience of being a vehicle for shalosh kippus hatmeis remains. Why does it remain? So he's going to explain in the next chapter, the gist of it is like this. If a person is very hungry, he has a headache, he's very uncomfortable, and he eats something, so he right away feels better. Eats something, he right away feels better, even though he hasn't digested the food yet. It hasn't yet turned into energy. It hasn't yet given him, but he already feels better. It had an immediate effect on him. Later, when he digests the food, it turns into energy, and he runs a mile on that energy. So he has the energy and is expending the energy. So it comes out like this: if a person was shot at the time that he ate, his intentions were gluttonous. So there's a certain effect that food had on him right away, and that effect is going to remain shalosh kippus hatmeis, because at the time that he ate it, his intentions were not godly intentions; they were quite ungodly. So therefore, that effect that it has on him, on his body and his soul, is an immediate effect, and that remains shalosh kippus hatmeis. The long-term effect that it has when he digests the food and he uses the energy, that because he used the energy for a good purpose, that becomes elevated. But there is going to be a certain trace of the experience of being a vehicle to Shalosh Kippus Atmeis that will remain with him, and he's going to explain that as a result of that, he's going to the body is going to need some kind of purification to deal with the fact that he at that moment became a vehicle to Shalosh Kippus Atmeis and it left a trace. So even though it's not like the person who ate for gluttonous reasons and then used the energy also for selfish things, because then he's really in trouble. But over here, where he used the energy for service of Hashem, it was only that at the time that he ate, it was for the wrong intentions, so only a trace will remain of Ksalosh Klippus Atmeis, which he's going to need to, after 120, want the neshama to be able to reach the highest levels and benefit from the rays of the Shekhinah at the highest level. So in order to be fit for that, he's going to have to go through a cleansing process. One of the parts of that cleansing process is called Chibut HaKever, which cleans out there's a mashal given that when you nowadays when you want to wash clothes, you throw it in the washing machine. The washing machine does everything for you. But once upon a time, there was a process. First thing you needed to do, you needed to beat it with sticks and knock out all the schmutz. Then you scrubbed it. Then you put it in hot water, and it went through various rates. So that's a mashal used. What happens to the neshama? In order for the neshama to go into Gan Eden, it has to go through a various cleansing process. One of the parts of the cleansing process is being beaten. That's chibut hakever, that's the beating of the grave, to cleanse the neshama from the traces of klipa that it absorbed, and things that were done for the wrong reasons, even if later the energy was used for the right reasons. So therefore, it's not a good idea to do things for the wrong reasons. It's much better to do it for the right reasons. Even if they were done for the wrong reasons, if they were permissible, they could be elevated. I just want to clarify that when Tanya speaks about anything to do with the afterlife, with purifications and things like that, it's important to recognize that Tanya is not a book about afterlife. Tanya is a book about life in this world, how to serve Hashem right now. But sometimes it's good to know where things fit in the bigger picture, so that it gives you clarity on which things and what that we do today connect us to Hashem, and which things that we do today distance us from Hashem.
He says it's carry on his analogy, this house, he's very hungry, gone away to the Shiur, really hungry.